kick off 2021 with our Digital Dialogue series. I'm delighted to welcome Helen James, the Managing Partner of Deloitte Western Sydney, out there in the Parramatta office, one of the real success stories in a Deloitte global empire. And welcome to Western Sydney Unfiltered this year, Helen. As my staff say, I'm always unfiltered. You're a little more filtered than I am, but hopefully we can have a little chat and talk about life this side of 2020 behind us. So let's kick off there. Hell of a year, both for Deloitte, for you as a manager of a large number of people, a manager of a brand in a region, one of the best known corporate brands in our region. But we kick off 2021. We thought the end of it, Donald Trump had gone, a vaccine was coming. Happy times are here again. It's interesting, we've had a summer without bushfires, but we've probably had a sober summer where we've realised that 2021 might be closer to 2020 than to 2019. How do you see it panning out commercially?
Well, first of all, Chris, thanks for the invitation to be on this series. I've watched every single one of these dialogue interviews and they've all been really, really fascinating. So great to be being interviewed.
You set a high bar for yourself then.
I know, exactly. I know some of the people you've had on. But going back to your question, I mean, Chris Richardson, who's, one of the best economists in Australia and one of our key Deloitte Access Economics partner, has come out publicly in the last couple of days and said, look, Australia is in a good position. Things are looking good, but there are some caveats around that. And I think, we're really at that point there where we've had a good economic success story in Australia. I think the three key points that he raised are that, obviously we've got to keep these pandemic outbreaks under control. What happens with the vaccine is really important. And then I think the other one is around understanding and having some more certainty around border opening and closing. I think that's a key one. But that as a country, we have come through this really, really well. And I think, I'm optimistic. Many of my clients are optimistic, but we do have challenges undoubtedly.
If anybody hasn't seen the new LAM ad, the Australian LAM ad, the United States of Australia, where interstate border walls are crushed down by trucks to try and get to the barbecued lamb. It's a great play on what has become the affliction. We launched COVID with an embarrassing array of run-on toilet paper in the supermarkets, and with government screaming at the punters to stop acting stupidly. It's hard not to make the argument that we've gone the full circle, that the punters are now the adults in the relationship and that some governments are overreacting politically with border closure, which makes it just leads to uncertainty, right, at a time when we're trying to put as much certainty back in the system as possible.
Yeah, I mean, I think the politicians are making those decisions. It's difficult. No one's been through this before. So I think, they're doing it for valid reasons. But I do agree it's that uncertainty that's most challenging.
We saw during running the business as you did during 2020, and I'm fascinated by the fact that we've had, as I'm sure the Deloitte Access Economics guys would agree, almost 30 years of economic sunshine, that Australian managerial class largely have never run businesses during a recession if they've acted locally. Some have done better or worse in that, but it's market share. But the general nature of running a business productively during diminished demand, as entire generation of managers have come and gone without that experience. Are you confident that what you're seeing across a client base across Western Sydney particularly, that there's some capacity to understand what it is to run and drive and launch businesses in periods of recession?
I think undoubtedly that we have that capability and people have responded really, really well through this. And again, obviously it's been different in each of the different sectors. I think the way we've helped our clients through this period is that initial period, it was really helping them to respond initially, survival. Yep. So we pivoted the way that we support our clients to really helping them through that initial, oh my goodness, what's going on? And then it didn't take long for many of those businesses to actually get into that recovery stage. And I think, to your question, that's where the brains behind Australian businesses really kicked in. They looked at the strategies, their supply chain, the talent issues, working remotely, all those issues. And I think, we as a country, we've done really, really well from a business perspective, manage those uncertainties that we referenced earlier.
Because one of the big professional service employers of Western Sydney, probably the biggest professional service operation in the whole region. Did your responsibilities, your leadership style change during the pandemic? Is it easier or harder to manage people by remote control? Does it hard to get an executive together? And is it true collaboration? Is it thin collaboration we're hearing about? What did you learn as a leader during that period?
Really, really good question. I think, the key thing for me was the shift to really understanding how responsible I am for my team's well-being and health. And I think, as a business leader before, maybe I'd not realised that quite so much. Mental well-being, physical well-being, all those aspects that we really focused on over the last sort of 10 months. We kept our offices open all the way through the pandemic. We restricted space, but we kept them open because we were really concerned about some people being in situations where they weren't safe at home, or they needed to get to work for other reasons. So we were very conscious of the well-being of our staff through that. So I think it was that was the key learning.
Correct me if it's changed. You were pre-pandemic about to enter a process of renewing office leases and your accommodation. Is it a good time to be in the market as a buyer of renter a significant office floor space?
Well, it's
in Parramatta.
It's a really interesting question, and it's a frontier land, because you're right. I mean, our lease is up. It's not secret. Our lease is up in a few years' time, so we are looking, and we're as part of obviously looking at what's available in Parramatta, which is fantastic at this point in time. The product that we've got here is phenomenal, and the choice is great. But that construct, and lots of businesses are going through it, is what space do we need? How do we work? What's the future of the workforce and the workplace going to be? There'll be more spaces for collaboration, less rows of desks.
More Zoom studios like we're in now. So
yeah, exactly. And thinking through that has been really, really interesting. So we've been at the forefront in Western Sydney of the firms, national and global thinking around what the workforce.
You're the big new office coming.
Pretty much. That's right. We've got a new office in Sydney, but that's already signed up, and so we are the frontier, which is awesome.
It's a lot of nervous landlords in Western Sydney, and they all want to know your number. We'll send it to you later. She's the one to call. As you and I spoke about before, the Shaping Future Cities, that Deloitte remarkable piece of public policy, private sector leadership in a public policy space that laid out the ambitious target for the 200,000 new jobs for the region. It's about 5 years since that was kicked off by your predecessor, Danny Resick, that you've talked, and Theo assisting both of you on the way through. Are you more confident, less confident now that those jobs are attainable? And we didn't envisage a pandemic when we all started that wonderful adventure. So I wonder where that's factoring into that ambition.
Yeah, look, I think we're still very optimistic, that we've still got a need to grow into Western Sydney. We've got government support, we've got the infrastructure projects that have been committed to and that are planned. I think in a way, I mean,
we are too big to fail now, aren't we?
Absolutely.
By government.
Oh, absolutely. If you think about Australia and the need to, to recover from an economic perspective across Australia, with the third largest economy, so much opportunity here, and we know that the government is focused as private sector is. I mean, the key things there are, making sure that we are all collaborating, we are actually working to the plan that's been established, and having the courage to actually make the decisions and do the things that we've planned to do, because I think we're really at that pivotal point. The pandemic has definitely put the brakes on a little bit, but sometimes that's not a bad thing, because it makes you just stop and refocus and rethink.
Prioritise, isn't it? All growth isn't always good. It's hard to get carried away in that boomtown mentality. That's a bit of a filter. Speaking of talent, one of the real strengths you've brought into our network is your interest in and support for talent development, your personal support for our Generation Next, a group of very young talented graduates in the region getting together and determining and advising us on youth policy. They're all in their sort of early 20s, but they're still very young compared to me. I remember when I was a bright young thing about 1,000 years ago. How do you, again, in that mix across Western Sydney, and we often talk about there's no talent deficit in Western Sydney, but there's very much a confidence deficit that's showing up sadly in less than preferential success rates of young graduates vis-a-vis some inner city unis. What's your wisdom to put to these kids who want to get a start at Deloitte or other places? How do they work with that confidence, the resilience to say that they're just as good? Their marks show they're just as good as a kid coming out of the Eastern unis, but they just seem to have that confidence deficit, which seems to hold them back a bit.
Well, it's interesting, Chris. I mean, many of the talented, young people that I've met in this region are very confident, and I think it's making sure that that we're promoting and profiling those individuals. And I know what you do through the Generation Next, Generation West program is
Yep.
phenomenal, and I'm really proud of the 3 grads that we've had involved in that this year. I think
even interviewed them, one of them here before the boss. That was
Yeah, I know.
That's probably a career limiting move for him.
No, I was very proud of the 3 of them. So I think what you're doing there is fantastic. But I think it's all around, profiling them, involving them, listening to them. And certainly my experience is they have as much to say and as valid things to say as anybody else. It's thinking through that diversity. The diversity angle is really important.
Most of them want your job after being there 3 weeks. It's a
Yeah,
generational thing.
That's okay. But again, I think, it's really important that diversity angle, and that is a real plus for Western Sydney. And I think, my advice to a young person watching this would be, think about your background and what you bring that's different and diverse, and the challenges that you've maybe worked through that give you skills that might not come through a traditional, more sort of, traditional background.
Because they don't all have the Westie accent like you.
I know, mine's really strong.
It's well and truly adopted Westie accent. Just more personally, as we let you get back to servicing the great businesses of Western Sydney and keeping them going forward, it has been a massive period of transformation as well. COVID, not only we transformed economies, we transformed the way we work, our adaptability to online, and we're doing this now over the interwebby rather than sitting in one-to-one with a camera. It went through a lot of changes. Away from the office, or from actually back on Deloitte, for you, you're a significant leader, corporate leader in our region. You've had a lot of experience in business. How did it change you as a person, as a boss, as a citizen? How do you approach 2021, maybe differently than a year ago?
I think a couple of things. I think one of the key things is additional confidence. Is confidence that you collectively, if you work collaboratively, can deal with anything that's thrown at you.
Confidence born of resilience.
Absolutely, and the knowledge that to do that effectively, you need to be working with other people. So I think collaboration, confidence, and the ability to be agile and adapt. Also that to start with, I love the Zoom calls, and then I think I got the same as everyone else, and it was a little bit like, I want to talk to some people. So it's thinking through, having time on your own to actually think, and then time to think collaboratively, and having that hybrid way of working is something that we're all going to be doing. Hopefully, most of us will be doing differently going forward. And certainly for me, I think I've always worked agilely, but it's great to have had to do it formally for that period of time and know that it's been successful.
Well, thank you for your time. Can I point out the risk of, not my son patronising? One of the great things about Western Sydney now is the fact that from what was traditionally a very blokey sort of region, it's now in many ways led by women. The crusade Lucy Turnbull started, let's use Turnbull at the GSC, now joining our board of patrons this year. Sarah Hill worked for her ongoing in that capacity. Some of the great local government bosses of the region, Lindy's and Kirsten, who's now gone on to planning, the planning department officials. There are so many people in this role where I think one of the transformations for our region is that it's increasingly a female-led, and that does change. I hope that changes the Western Sydney I grew up in, that is more tolerant. It's certainly more collaborative, and without a doubt, if there's some distinct masculine and feminine things, collaboration more naturally falls to a female side of that, and the rest of us blokes are learning that. So for all the ways you're helping that transformation, Helen, to your team at Deloitte, who have just been rock solid from us since day one. And I think we'll celebrate our delayed 5th anniversary, 6th anniversary, 6 years of collaboration in Western Sydney in March this year, that you guys have been actively involved with. Let me also thank you for all that work it's been from Peter Forrester to Danny Resnick to Helen Hamilton-Jones. There's an evolution in itself. There's the picture of with a constant theosophagus hovering underneath. But one of the great contributing organisations to this forum and to this region. So thank you for your time, and let's hope 2021 is a little better than 20.
Pleasure. Thanks, Chris.
Thanks, Helen.